Today's reading will be from Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and then there I will store all my grain and my goods. And then I'll say to myself, 'You have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?' This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich towards God."
It's an old joke about how materialistic our society has become. A man living in Southern California was on his way to work one morning in his brand new BMW, so proud of his new car. But suddenly the big one hit. The earth began to tremble under his wheels and the car was just swallowed up by the earth. The man was seriously injured, but as he climbed out of the wreckage, he didn't even notice that his left arm had been cut off at the elbow. He just stood by the side of the road, viewing the wreckage and crying out, "My Beamer, my Beamer." A man who had witnessed the disaster said to him, "How can you be crying about your car? Don't you realize that your arm has been cut off?" And the man looked down in horror at his missing arm and said, "Oh no, my Rolex, my Rolex." There's no question that we live in a materialistic society and that money and possessions have become the driving force of much of what happens in the daily lives of many people. And so people who want to live a life based on spiritual values often find themselves struggling with the issue of money. They have to answer questions like, well, how much is enough? What should I do with my money? Does God even want me to have money? Can you be comfortably well off and still be spiritual? Should I give all my money to the poor? Should I give any of my money to the poor? Well, the Bible has a great deal to say about money. And I, like a lot of preachers, are sometimes hesitant to preach about that because I don't want people to think I'm just looking for bigger offerings. But when you read the Gospels, you may be surprised to find that Jesus spoke about this topic often. 16 out of the 38 parables that he told deal with how to handle money and possessions. The Bible offers many verses about many things, about 500 different verses about prayer, and almost that many about faith. But more than 2,000 verses are about money and possessions. So you can't preach the Bible without preaching about money. But since the Bible has so much to say about this subject, it's surprising that we have so many misconceptions about money. Some of our erroneous ideas are based on misinterpretations of Scripture, but most of them just come from the culture in which we live. But let's quickly examine a few of those misconceptions. Misconception number one is that money is the root of all evil. This quote has been attributed to the Bible, but it's actually, in fact, a misquote. Actually, the quote from 1 Timothy 6:10 says that the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. There's a big difference. Money in itself is neither good nor bad. We all need it in order to live. But it is our attitude toward money that determines its usefulness. It's our attitude toward money that determines the morality surrounding it. Misconception number two is that God needs my money or the church will fail. A lot of televangelists are known for guilting people into giving money, or else the ministry is just going to fall flat. If you don't give, then it's all your fault because you didn't give enough. Well, I got news for them, and that is this, that God is not poor. He owns it all. When you give to the Lord's work, you're not helping him out of a jam. When you give to the church, you're not saving it from extinction. In the book of Psalms, chapter 50, verse 10, David quotes God as saying, "I have no need of a bull from your stall or of goats from your pens. For every animal of the forest is mine and the cattle on 1,000 hills. Now, of course, he still demanded to them to make sacrifice of animals, but it wasn't that because God needed them. He still demands that we give our money to the work of the Lord because it's not because he needs it or else the church will fail. Another misconception is that having enough money will make me happy, or along those lines, having more money will make me happier. Yes, the problem with that is that the target for enough or more always keeps moving, doesn't it? Financial guru Ken Roberts talked about building his fortune and how he had set goals for himself. And once he thought he made $1 million, that would give him just a peace of mind. But when he finally got there, he didn't have it. So, well, maybe if I make it 5 million and 10 million, and the number kept growing up until he finally realized that no amount would give him what he was looking for. His peace of mind would have to come from something besides his bank account. I think that's a lesson for all of us. If you're looking for peace of mind, don't look for it in your bank account. Misconception number 4, if I had enough money, then I could do a lot of good. Heard many people say things like, well, if I won the lottery, just think of what the tithe to the church would be. Just about any pastor's eyes light up at that thought. Or if I get a big inheritance or I come into a big windfall, I could sure do a lot for God and for the church. I read a survey recently of people who were asked the question, what would you do if you had $1 million? And nearly everyone said, I would give some to charity. And it's true that most charities and most churches are not in any position to turn down a donation. It's also true that as a church, the more money we have, the more things we can do. But you see, there isn't enough money in all the world to do all that the church can do. And the bottom line is that money doesn't do the work of the Lord. People do. Money doesn't spread the gospel. People do. Giving money is good. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But please understand, if you want to make an impact on the world, it requires something more than just casting off some of your windfall. You can do a lot more good by tithing what you have right now than waiting until you have a greater gift that you think will do a lot of good. Plus, you can do a whole lot more good just by giving your time and using your spiritual gifts than anything that money could buy or anything that money could do. And then the next misconception about money is this, that God doesn't want me to have money. Some people teach that there is a certain spirituality in being poor. And they often refer then to Jesus' command to the rich young ruler that he sell all that he owned and give it to the poor. We need to remember that Jesus did say this, but he only said it once. He only said it to one person who was obsessed with money. And we also know that he had followers among him who were quite affluent, owned businesses, and were prominent members of society. In the Old Testament, people like David and Solomon and Job and Abraham were all very wealthy. Now, you may feel that the financial demands of our society means that you just weren't meant to be rich. It's just not in the cards for you. Well, that may be true. I can't say. But what I can say is that God does not insist that you be poor. He does insist that you have the right attitude toward money. So what is the right attitude about money? Well, it's right there in verse 15, the passage that Kathy read for us. Jesus said, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Jesus said our greatest danger is in becoming greedy. If you think only of stockpiling things for yourself and you neglect your relationship with God and your obligation to others, ultimately you'll just self-destruct. So today we're going to look at 3 things that you can do to guard against greed and to develop the attitude toward money that Jesus would want you to have. First of all, maybe most obvious, to realize that money is not the most important thing in life. Universities are full of students who are pre-med or pre-law or working toward an MBA, not because they have a passion for medicine or for law or business, but because they believe that's where the money is. They believe that their degree will enable them to earn a good living. And what happens to many of these students, as years later they find themselves in the workforce and earning an enviable salary, but yet dissatisfied with their lives and their careers and feeling too trapped to make a change. And one of the sadder things I see happening is in the world of athletics. More and more high school students are going straight to the pros because they're really good at a sport, or students are leaving college early to go to the pros. And the only reason is because of the money. Now, to most people, it would seem crazy not to take advantage of that opportunity. They can sign contracts worth millions and millions of dollars They'd only have to play a few years of their sport if they wanted to, and feasibly they would, if they had any sense about using money, would be set for life. And so it seems to make sense just to go for it now. After all, they could get injured or they could lose their ability and not be able to make the money later. And millions of dollars are just laid right in their lap. So why not just snap it up? It sounds good. Too good to be true. That's because it is too good to be true. There's story after story of athletic stars who end up wasting their lives with no education, with nothing to fall back on once their career is over. The money gets used up or thrown away on frivolous things. Many become alcoholics or drug addicts or just end up reaping the results of a promiscuous lifestyle. And all their money got them nowhere. All right, well, what does that have to do with you and me? I don't think anybody here is in line to get a $100 million sports contract anytime soon. But you see, all of us have been in situations where we had to make a decision and decide whether to make that decision based on finances or not. When you have an important decision to make, do not let money be the deciding factor. Of course, it's a factor to consider in all things. If you have various jobs and they're all the same except for the amount of money you make, anybody's going to take the larger paying salary. But don't forget about all those other factors. And if money is the only deciding factor, then you're in for trouble. People who make choices like that, or any choice, career or otherwise, based solely on financial priorities, will often find those decisions coming back to haunt them. Money is a miserable master. When you let it guide the decisions that you make, you'll find that it inevitably just leads to isolation and loneliness. Jesus said, a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. There's more to life than making money. There's more to life than having money. And to the extent that we remember this, then we can safeguard ourselves against that issue of greed. Along with that, the second thing I'd like to challenge you with today is to learn to enjoy the financial blessings in your life. No matter where you may fall on the socioeconomic scale, there are some people who are above you and some who are below you. I know too many people who are not able to appreciate what they have because they're too focused on what they don't have. Now, true, I'm sure there are people in the world who do not have the financial pressures that you feel that you have. And from your point of view, their life might seem easy and carefree. And maybe you think that's just not fair. But at the same time, there are those who do not have it as easy as you do. So instead of thinking about what might be missing from your life, be grateful for all that you have. Orange County, California is the most affluent county in the nation. And according to Money Magazine, the median income in Orange County is 80% above the rest of the country. Yet, when Orange County residents were surveyed, the overwhelming response from the majority of residents was, I need to have a little more. Here are hundreds of thousands of the richest people in the world, and yet instead of enjoying their wealth, instead of being grateful for what they have, they're convinced that they have to have more. It's not just I'm picking on Californians. The reality is their cost of living is much more than anybody else's, and they need more money. And the fact is that we see this attitude everywhere we go. Solomon warned against this attitude in Ecclesiastes 6:9. It says, better what the eyes see than the roving of the appetite. Or one paraphrase says, it's better to see what you have than to want more, because wanting more is useless, like chasing after the wind. So do you want to get rid of this I never have enough mentality and begin to enjoy what you do have financially? Do you want to experience financial freedom? Well, there's a way to do that. It's simple, but it's not easy. It takes a little effort at first, and here it is. Groundbreaking news here. Live within your means. Spend less than you earn. Don't buy anything you can't pay for. And I know many of us are, well, that's impossible in this day and age. But the truth is, it is possible. Not that I've done it, I've borrowed money, but I've also realized the consequences of doing that. The key to financial freedom is not to increase your income, but rather it is to decrease your wants. The wealthiest person is the one who is satisfied with the least number of things. I'm sure you've heard a lot of people stress in leadership seminars and things like that. The idea of goal setting is very stressed, and that's great. Goal setting is a wonderful thing to do. We all need to dream dreams and to have visions, no matter what you're talking about. You have to have goals, whether it's the Lord's work or just for your family or for your job. You need to identify what it is that you want to do and accomplish and what it's going to take to do that. You need to figure out what you want and how you're going to get it. Most of the time, doing what you want to do is going to require money and lots of it. And so if what you want is homes and cars and boats and computers and other stuff, you know it's going to take getting a lot of money. And there's nothing wrong with owning things, nothing wrong with having things. But if that's what you want, it's going to take money. Even if your goals are more spiritual in nature, you're still most likely going to need money to accomplish your dreams. To build a church, to grow a church, it takes money. To have a ministry, it takes money. And we could all come up with quite a shopping list of all the things that we might want or would like to have, whether we're talking about our personal lives or our spiritual lives. And nothing necessarily wrong with that. If you're satisfied just with how far you've gotten, you may never get any further or do anything else with your life. So go for your dreams. Try to get what it is you want. But my point here is that there's a big difference between being complacent and being content. Complacency is being satisfied with your progress and not feeling the need to progress anymore. Contentment is being satisfied with what you have and not feeling that you have to have more. God doesn't want us to be complacent. God wants us to desire to keep moving forward and to keep being willing to grow and to change and to develop. But he also wants us to learn to be content with what he has chosen to give to us and to be grateful for what we have and not think that we have to have more just because somebody else has more. So being goal-driven doesn't mean being possession-driven. I think we all can understand that in terms of things that we own and we buy. We shouldn't let our possessions be so important that they own us. But I think we also need to apply that to spiritual things and to the work of the church. We can't let the driving force behind the work that we do be the accumulation of success or accomplishments or people even. Even if those are good things to have. Jesus said, be on guard against all kinds of greed. That means that we should strive to enjoy the things that we have. And if we dream to have more, then we need to be sure that our dreams are according to what God's vision is for us, not just because we think we should have more. I've been thinking a lot about this lately, and I challenge you to do the same. God has blessed our church greatly. He doesn't want us to stop where we are, but he does want us to acknowledge what he has done. We need to be grateful for all he's done and to trust him to continue to provide the vision and the means to accomplish that vision. Then a third challenge for today, you might have guessed this, and that is to practice giving to others. In today's parable, the man's sin was not that he was successful, as we see, that he had a good crop, and he thought, well, what should I do? I don't have any place to store my crops. He said in verse 18, well, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. That actually sounds like a pretty good business plan. If you want to expand your business, you got to plan on growth and do that. So that wasn't the problem at all. The problem is that he was selfish about it. In verse 19, he said, I'll say to myself then, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? In this parable, the man's soul was required of him that very night, and he never received what he thought he was preparing for himself. And then Jesus said in verse 21, this is how it will be for anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich toward God. It's no coincidence that the word miser and the word miserable come from the same root. God didn't bless you financially so that you could keep it for yourself. When you try to hang on to everything, you lose the joy of abundance. You also miss out on the joy of being a blessing to other people. So the only way to release this grip that materialism can have on us is to learn to give. Now, most people intend to be generous, but too often we put it off until we think we can afford it. For most of us, that day may never come because our expenses tend to rise with our income. And so it's easy for our entire paycheck to be consumed by what we feel are necessities. If we do not make a concentrated effort to start giving, then we'll just procrastinate forever. Solomon warned of that in Ecclesiastes 5:11, when he says, as goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owner except to feast his eyes on them? And that's why Solomon recommends that we become generous. Ecclesiastes 11:1 says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will find it again." Proverbs 19:17 says, "He who is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward him for what he has done." Jesus also told us in Matthew 6:19, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Jesus is just teaching a basic principle of life. The secret to living is giving. Sometimes we put off giving because we feel we don't have too much to give. Big givers tend to draw a lot of attention to themselves, and sometimes their magnanimous gifts make ours just seem insignificant in comparison. Every time Bill Gates makes a donation, he makes the cover of Newsweek about the $1 billion that he gave here and there. And I think it's safe to say nobody in this room is going to be in a position to make the kind of charitable gifts that Bill Gates does. But I think we also need to point out that whatever his gifts are, it really does not have that much of an effect on his net worth. Jesus recommended another way of giving. One day, according to Mark 12, when donations at the temple were being collected, many wealthy individuals were throwing in large amounts and getting much fanfare about it. But then along came a poor widow who just gave 2 small copper coins, barely worth a penny. And Jesus said to his disciples in verse 43, "This poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all that she had to live on." Now, Jesus is not saying that we should turn our backs on our responsibilities to our family, to our homes, and to our bills, and give all our money away. He's just saying that we should be willing to give sacrificially, not just what we have to spare. C.S. Lewis once said, "The only safe rule is to give more than we can spare. If our charities do not at all pinch or hamper us, I should say they are too small." On this subject, John Wesley said, "Earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can." Both of these great men understood this basic life principle, that the secret to living is giving. And as we talk about that in church and the basic families of church, the very idea of tithing your income, giving 10% back to the Lord, is something that will require a great deal of sacrifice and will pinch you and be difficult. For others, 1/10 is no big deal. That's just the bare minimum of they can sure spare a lot of that. So it's the issue is whether it's sacrificial or not, whether it is something that causes you to know that this is something I'm giving up to give to others. So what would Jesus have us think about money? It's plain to see that his attitude toward money is very different in many ways than ours is. He's not against your having money. He just doesn't want your money to have you. He warns us to be on guard against greed, to watch out for that mentality of having to have more, more, and more. And the best way to combat this is to recognize that money isn't everything, to recognize that we already have much to be thankful for, and to discover that the secret of living is giving. This will loosen the grip that materialism can have on your life, and it will enable you to have more control of your money rather than your money having control over you. Is anyone here today that you don't know Jesus? Please don't worry about giving any money to the church. You can't buy your way to heaven, and the money to do what we need to do will come from somewhere in God's timing, in God's way. First, come to Christ for salvation. And let God teach you through his word how to be a good steward of what he has provided for you. And those here today, most of you who are Christians, please do not be deceived that your finances are a separate issue from your spiritual life or your faith. They go hand in hand. Your obedience to God in matters of money is a gauge of your trust and your reliance on him. So let each of us commit ourselves to Christ in every area of our lives, even our money, maybe especially our money.